My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Shall we get started, guys? And I think there's a really important subject and why there's three blokes on this call talking about menopause. But Tom, you and I have had many chats over the last few months about hormones, about women, and that type of thing. But when a woman has menopause, she's quite deep in her career. That means she's quite senior in her earning capacity. And when she's faced with possibly stepping out of the workforce, how does this impact a woman from a pension point of view, a contribution point of view, and her overall wealth?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, as a financial planner, and that's what I am foremost. Here at Skybound, we have many offices around the world, starting with the US all the way through to the UK and further afield. But we work with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds at all different parts of their phase of financial planning, whether that be in their early years, their high earning career, or in their decumulation phase of retirement. And as a planner, our job is ultimately to make sure that people are aware of some of the financial hurdles that they could face, right? We have a great brand within Skybound called Women Like Us. We work very closely through we have a number of female advisors across a number of offices. But there's some really hard-hitting points here, Lawrence, to be honest, because we look at all the data and the studies that go behind this sort of stuff, right? So if I may, I'm just going to give you some stats because I think some of these stats will really bring the financial aspect to light for you. All right. So we've seen some studies from the likes of Stanford University and the London College as an example that signifies somewhere in the region of women can lose up to somewhere in around the 10% mark of their earnings as a result of menopause. So the first few years of menopause as an example. And that's quite a big step backwards. The 10% is the higher end, but the medium is certainly the 4, 5s and 6%. Okay. That's the height of their careers. Now, that smaller step back as a result of having more time off, maybe not being able to press as hard in their career and take the steps forwards that they were, have to come out of work altogether or change direction as a result of, not being able to commit fully to what they're doing at the time. That then hits in a number of ways. Okay, so there's kind of two aspects to this from an accumulation perspective. In the US and the UK, as an example, we both have either state pensions that we can accumulate, or in the US, we have Social Security. Okay. And women already have it hard enough, in my opinion, to really maximize those state benefits, because often in the UK, as an example, the minimum requirement today to hit a full UK state pension is 35 years. Well, if a lady is taking some time out to do childcare, etc., she's obviously taking away from the years that she's being able to contribute to her state pension. So being impacted by something like menopause again and having to take more time out of that working career could be potentially, if the right planning isn't done, i.e. the right credits aren't applied for, or the voluntary contributions going into the state system aren't being made, then again, when you get to what would be the new retirement age of 67 today, they're not going to get the full amount from the state. Same sort of scenario in the US, right? The US, I think, sometimes can hit harder. The US's social security system is based upon how long somebody is working for. So there's a minimum time period that somebody has to contribute in the system before being awarded social security later on. And then it's also based on how much you're earning. So if someone's being impacted in their highest earning years by something like menopause and having to take a reduction in pay, it means that they're contributing less to the system. Again, this is going to have a massive knock-on effect when they come to secure those social benefits in retirement, because they're not going to be getting as much as they would have done should they've been able to complete their full career in the way that they were going as they were, okay, before menopause hit. So that's the first point about the social system. And again, like I said, I think ladies already have it hard enough to some degree, because many people take a responsibility to take children on and look after those for a period of time. So they're already at kind of a shortfall on that. The second point is And nobody ever has enough for retirement, no matter who I talk to, right? No matter where they are in the world or what they're doing. The second part is then really the private contributions. Yeah, your personal pensions, your company pensions, your additional savings and investments that may occur outside of a workplace. So let me just give you an example, right? So if you've got a woman who in the UK who's earning £60,000, they're automatically enrolled in a UK company pension. Let's say they were paying 8% of their income to their pension, so that would be kind of £9,600 a year. If you were to miss, let's say, 2 years out, yeah, not contributing those 2 years and letting it grow over the next 15, 20 years, as an example, a simple maths of 5% a year, that short of 20,000 that she would have invested could turn into well in excess of £100,000 later on in life. So just 2 years out can have a massive impact later on. Yeah, and I think people fail to understand that long-term planning aspect sometimes. And whilst something as hard as menopause is, and when we don't give it the right support, certainly from a financial perspective, or we don't plan for it, just what we seem as a very short period of time financially can have a devastating impact over the longer term, because there's so many other things that contribute to that financial situation. So it's these small pieces that I think we're missing when it comes to financial.
I think that's really interesting, Tom, especially when you talk about it from a personal side of things, like you're working with an individual that you're working through their financial planning through their lifetime. And I think just to support some of the statistics that you're sharing about what you're seeing as it impacts the individual, taking a look at a Mayo Clinic study. I'm here in Minnesota in the United States, so Mayo Clinic is down the street. And the Mayo Clinic did a study that said they're showing a $1.8 billion a year loss in productivity due to the impact of menopause symptoms. And when they add to that the subsequent medical costs, because that's just missing work, but when they add the subsequent medical costs to it, the number jumps up to 26.6 billion. So at a macro scale across companies, you can see the financial impact. And then on the individual scale, like you're sharing, you can also see the impact. So the impact is everywhere. And the question I have for you is, if you, as a financial planner, you're aware of this, how do you sit down with a woman and weave this in to the conversation?
Yeah, good question, Jesse. And I think, like I said at the start, our job as a financial planner is often just to make people aware of those future hurdles that they're going to face. When a parent, as an example, has a newborn child, the last thing they want to think about is funding their potential university fee in the next 18 years' time, because they're still small and cute and cuddly and they're still in their arms. And the last thing they want to do is envisage them going somewhere else, right? It's a bit the same with this type of hurdle. We know it's coming, and for most people, we're not going to get away from it. Yeah. Similar to retirement, at some point, most people retire. Unfortunately, everyone will die. Yeah, there's two certainties in life: you die and pay taxes. So, it's kind of just addressing those points, and I think that's where a lot of the time, that's why people use a financial planner and work with somebody like us at Skybound, is because we really enforce those accountabilities and we get those conversations happening much sooner in the household. And I think there is a big obligation to kind of address this as a household. If a partner in the house is going to face that problem, yeah, how can we plan for it now? Certainly getting ahead of the curve, right? For those that are younger, yeah, we can get ahead of it. So what extra provisions do we need to be making in our, and look, don't get me wrong, not many people are trying to financially plan in their 20s. They're still trying to work out who they are to some degree. But how can we get ahead of this in our early 30s, mid 30s, and as we start our careers and we're getting some more pennies in our pockets? Can we plan for those years of not being able to contribute at the highest points of our career, right? So I think, from a financial planning aspect, it's having those conversations early. I think when we're catching people in the height of their career, it's then addressing what happens going forward and having those realistic conversations of, do you actually know the impact of this now? Not just from a health perspective, not from a relationship perspective, but from a monetary perspective. And if you don't, what can we be doing? Is there somebody else in the household that has an income that can help? And we can start to take some provisions away from what is coming in from that side of the household to make up the shortfall on this side of the household. So again, if we're catching it at that point and we're having those conversations, it's just about making it very clear what is happening from a financial aspect. Just like I said, to go through those sorts of numbers and make people aware, you could take a year out, but do you know the impact of that? Do you know what that means for your retirement? Do you know what that means from a top line perspective? Do you know what that means from a bottom line perspective? How does that impact your goals of what you want to achieve when you stop working? Does it impact you being able to stop at the age you want to stop at? Does it mean that you're going to have to work 1, 2, 3 more years in order to be able to have the income that you need to have in order to live without having a job, etc.? So, I think from a financial planning aspect, Jesse, and it's a great question, it's just having that education piece. And I think that's what we do so well as financial planners, is the education piece.
So from a simple English point of view, Tom, if a menopausal woman was listening to this, there is no doubt that they are possibly hampered from a financial perspective if they want to step out and take a break from their current careers, or if they want to even change direction. There's no doubt there's a financial implication to do that. So the advice you're giving is
menopause pay penalty.
Yeah. So even if you're going to pay a penalty, what you're basically saying is it's really important to seek advice as early as you can, so that you can soften the amount of penalty they're going to charge for having menopause.
100%, because there are a lot of things that people just don't naturally know, right? You can't know everything, and let's be clear, no one does. I think it's just about working and having these conversations as early as possible. You guys are obviously advocating for a conversation around menopause and for everybody to have this conversation, men included, right? I think from our perspective, it's, look at all aspects of how this impacts somebody. Like I said earlier, it's the personal relationships, it's the health, but it is also this financial aspect. In the UK, as a simple option, as an example, I spoke earlier about the UK state system and the state pension. People don't know necessarily that you can make voluntary contributions. So if you're not working, as an example, and you have a partner in the household who is, and you have surplus income, that might be difficult at that point if somebody's not working in the household and the other person is, and there's only one income, as an example. You have the ability to make a voluntary contribution to the state pension. The UK state pension today is £220 a week. To have something less than that would be hard. It's not enough in the first place, but people definitely want to be maximising that sort of stuff out. The same with sort of child benefit claims. And even if you're a very high earner and not getting a credit for it, you should be able to claim that child benefit. You may not be paid for it, but there's a mark on your system that says at these periods of time you were not working for, or you had a child for, and therefore there is some credit in the system for you to claim against in the future. So it's just the small points, and I think that's the really important aspect.
When you talk about the height of the career that you're seeing for women, can you approximate? I'm curious, can you approximate an age that you would assign that to, from based upon maybe your clients or anything else?
Yeah, I think definitely from that 45, 50-year-old onwards, I think, don't get me wrong, the world is changing, and the way people are coming into income and wealth is changing, and maybe we'll touch on that shortly. But 50 onwards, right? And I think this is where it aligns to that menopausal age and all the other terms that you guys would definitely know better than I would. But it's definitely from that 50 onwards. And I think it's at those inflection points that it's the same conversation we have with children and the decision to look after children or continue with a career. And that's a hot topic and one that's widely debated, I think, to some degree. But it's those inflection points, right? It's like, you get to that age, and do people carry on at the trajectory they're going, or is their health having an impact where they can't, and they make a decision to step back, reduce, or change direction that then drastically changes that potential future career earnings that go on from 50 to 65.
I think that's an important point because, to what you were saying, it is key to help, for our listeners to understand the context of what it is that you're saying, right? Because the impact of this time away and the financial impact that it can have on an individual has to be talked about in the context of what's going on in their lives from a menopause standpoint. And it just to look at some average age range, right? So perimenopause can start as soon as her early 30s, but if you look at the averages, 40 to 44 is kind of where that begins and starts to ramp up. The average age, at least in the U.S., for menopause is 51. But if you think about also what's going on in a woman's life in that time frame, it's not just the height of her career, which by earnings is around 44 in some studies I've seen. So, like you're saying, that 45 range, up to 50. That range right there, what else is happening is she's also raising kids that are going to be heading out to school, to university. She's also statistically likely to be caring for an elderly parent. And statistically, the average age for a woman to lose a parent is, I think it was 49 or 50 in a study that I was reading. So think about the menopausal symptoms that she could be dealing with, right? The things that we know about, like the lack of sleep, the insomnia, the physical pain, the anxiety, the depression, the lack of motivation, the hot flashes that can happen at work. We had a guest last week talking about from a huge company, Accenture, talking about how she was dealing with hot flashes in a business setting, right? So this is happening as she gets to the height of her career, as she's raising kids who are getting to the point where they're going to leave the house, or they need a lot of attention, and potentially taking care of elderly parents. So, and then has to think about, do I need some time away in order to deal with all of these things that I'm dealing with, both internally, but also externally in my personal life? And now on top of everything else, I have to also worry about the long-term financial impact of that decision. I mean, it's kind of
It's mind blowing, right?
it really is.
And I think, Jesse, just to your point there, you've got all of those compounding factors at such an important period of time and quite a short period of time, like you've just said there, right? That's all happening within, let's say, a 5-year window. So if a woman decides to step out and just go, hey, I'm gonna concentrate on the things that really matter to me right now. Yeah, and I'm going to take the next 5 years to deal with those elderly parents, to deal with those kids going off to college or through their teenage years, and I'm going to look after myself from a health perspective. That 5-year pause, depending on returns, and again, that's kind of the variable here, but that could reduce a retirement wealth by anywhere between 20 and 30%.
Wow. So, Tom, I'm going to change the direction of this podcast for a second. So that those stats are scary, but we know for a fact that more women get divorced whilst going through menopause than any other time in their life. Divorce, if you're lucky and you're married to a very wealthy man, divorce could mean that you're coming into lots of money. But for many women, divorce can be completely the opposite. How important, again, is it from a divorce perspective to seek not only legal advice when you're getting divorced, but seeking financial advice at the same time?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic and one that's weirdly come up in my diary this week. I had a very good conversation with a close working partner of ours in the legal framework this week, exactly on this sort of topic. And we were looking at UK statistics, and we kind of came across a stat. I don't know how true these stats are to some degree, but we saw something that kind of read the headline of over 60% of divorces are initiated by women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Okay, so so you've got this. I'm not looking at it from a menopause perspective. I'm looking at it from an age perspective. But we've definitely got this average, or we've got this big overlap in when this problem is occurring and when divorces are taking place. I think the UK average today for divorce is something like 43, 44 for women and a little bit older for men. And again, so that's now really honing in, as Jesse said there, that's really honing in that age for perimenopause and the relevant kind of symptoms that come up around it, right? So I think from our perspective, divorce is again, it's another compounding factor to that almost 5-year window. If we're then having to add this on top of it, it's an incredibly important part. And I did a seminar only 2 weeks ago now with a team of legals, talking about these aspects. And I think sometimes that women can sometimes, not always, but sometimes and often get left behind in the financial planning process. Certainly, we have an office in the Middle East as an example, in Dubai, which seems an incredibly popular place for Brits to move to at the moment. But we often see there, one partner is the main breadwinner, the other partner is at home full time with the kids, or whatever that may look like, and therefore the person that is the breadwinner in the relationship is often taking a lead on the financial planning side and understanding actually where the accounts are and what the accounts are doing and where they're invested and where they're not invested, etc., if they're invested. And as a result of that, again, we see so many women left behind in the financial education piece. And when a divorce does then happen, well, you're into all silly things. You're into, I didn't know those accounts existed. You've got one half of the relationship trying to hide stuff and and then legal teams are having non-disclosure battles, etc., etc. You then end up with ladies or partners who receive an account as a result of that divorcing process and have absolutely no idea who to talk to or what it does, right? And they're left with a pension, which may be a relatively complex asset. They may be left with a trust. They may be left with ISAs in the UK. They may be left with IRAs or 529s in the US as an example, HSAs, etc., etc. We're really good in the financial world of putting an acronym on absolutely anything, right? And then when somebody inherits that as a result of a divorce, who are they talking to? What are they doing with those things? And again, it's just the education piece. So my heart goes out in terms of this education piece. This is something that we are incredibly passionate about here at Skybound, and it's making sure that people are having the opportunities to speak to people, educate themselves, and understand what financial instruments are and how they benefit them, but also understand the complexities and the dangers of them all at the same time.
So, as a man, Tom, what is some of your experience, whether it might be with colleagues, in your personal life, yourself, just around this whole idea of education? What are you seeing? Are you seeing interest? Are you seeing men that seem to have some idea what's going on? Do you get a sense that nobody has any clue what's happening with respect to menopause, and of course the impacts of menopause on midlife and on money and all the things that we're talking about? Just what are you finding personally, as a man, married? What does this look like to you?
I'll be honest, it's you go through the financial planning process, whether it be with a male or a female, and sometimes it's hard enough to have a conversation and get them to relate to things like retirement. If I'm talking to a 35-year-old, 40-year-old today about the future, and it's like, no idea. I've got no idea where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be doing, and how much I need. So when you then start to come and work backwards, we always start at the end, one step further, and look at when we're not here and who we're leaving behind. But when we start to work backwards across that timeline, you go estate planning, you go retirement, and then kind of the next one is Jesse's kind of 3 or 4 elements there, right? It's like, okay, now let's talk about kids going to university and the cost of that. And then let's talk about other things. Let's talk about things like menopause. And I'm met with blank faces. It's for men and women to some degree. It's like, well, how does that have any impact on my financial circumstances? And then it's like, well, actually it does. And then we're into calculations, and we're into shortfall analysis, and we're into the cost of delay conversations. and it's, it's like anything, and you'll be surprised. Some people stick their head in the sand, and I think most people's initial reaction is, I'm going to stick my head in the sand, because it's not a problem of today. Do you know what I mean? And until you get there, no one really wants to address it, right? And this is why I have a job, and this is why we have an industry in financial planning, is because no one actually wants to take a proactive step to something that's 10, 15, 20, 30 years away potentially. So, yeah, I think you get mixed reactions. I think definitely from the male side of the community that engage in financial planning, that conversation is somewhat met with glazed eyes, blank faces. Certainly, some people who even struggle to recognise the term, right? Women certainly a lot more passionate and emotional about it because it's going to happen to them, and they definitely see a front. I would say that you have a front step forward with them first, and then kind of the partner is somewhat being dragged along on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I've got a tiered question for you. So,
Sure.
and I'm not sure if I'm accurate with this information, but I think I am. And I think Skybound has recognized it. That's why you have your Women Like Us. I believe that women are becoming the next wealthy group. There's a wealth shift. And I think this wealth shift is coming because of women inheriting money from divorce, inheriting money from death of partners, inheriting money from parents. And I think overall, you're seeing far more very wealthy women coming through. Now, why I say it's a tiered question, one, is that accurate? But two, as a woman, they're often a carer, they care of their children, they want to benefit their children. And in the UK, we've got this horrible habit, and I mean this sincerely, of running out and buying lots of properties and putting them into SPVs and not realizing, are all those properties a burden or are they an asset? Because what actually happens when you die, you could be leaving your kids with a tax bill that they've got serious issues to pay that tax bill.
Yeah.
What is your thought process around the importance again of creating the right financial structure when this happens so that you don't burden those who you love when that time comes?
Yeah, good question. And again, something that we're incredibly passionate about here is that kind of future look on estate planning and who's left with the problem later on. Just on the transition of wealth, I think, I think I read a stat a couple of weeks ago from UBS. They estimate something like over 100 trillion will change hands globally by 2045. So in the next 20 years, we've got somewhere in the region over 100 trillion moving from one generation to another generation due to the baby boomers moving on and leaving it to the next generation. I think, we've obviously had some big cases in the divorce world. We'll take Bezos as an example. I think, don't get me wrong, there is that side to it, and it is happening on the divorce front, definitely from an inheritance aspect that is coming, and it is in process now, that transition of wealth. And when you actually look at the lower generations today, they're incredibly poor in comparison to the older generations. So that is going to happen. I think from a female perspective, is it solely females that are getting it? It goes both ways on the transition of wealth side. We see lots of successful women today. I think women in business is continuing to power on. The decision between, do I have kids or not have kids? Do I balance both? Do I have kids and have a career? We see a lot of very, very successful women in business today. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startup females. Influencers, as again, we talk about wealth and distribution of wealth and how wealth is earned today in comparison to years gone by. Content creators at the younger age, the middle age and the older age, some are certainly getting involved across the board, but the younger age are definitely embracing it. Crypto, as an example, again, a portion of the market has been attracted to those types of assets and made wealth in those types of assets. So, I think the people that are engaging with wealth today is changing in terms of the gender. I think we are seeing a higher percentage of women certainly engage with financial planning services, which is great to see. Historically, that's always been a much lower number than men, and I think to some degree that's driven by the fact that the financial services industry has always been a very male-dominated industry. So again, we advocate for women in our business here at Skybound to continue to educate and attract those types of clientele. The second half of that question is, what should women be doing with money? I don't disagree with you at all, Lawrence. I think it's really interesting. I work across the US. We have lots of UK clients and who have moved to the US over the years. Obviously, we have a business unit in the UK from a Skybound perspective. If I look at the contrast and the difference between the two, and Jesse may help me advocate for this to some degree, but I think the UK is quite sheltered from an investment perspective, or certainly has been. I watch a little bit of UK TV every now and then, and I'm certainly seeing a lot more financial services adverts in the last 2 or 3 years than I've ever seen in the last 30, 35 years. I've now got Aviva telling me that I should have an investment account, or I've been saving and should I save, or I've got an AJ Bell advert. Those adverts are far more common than they were 5-10 years ago. In the US, we're a bit different. We're all very tuned into our 401ks. We kind of understand the investments or we say we understand. We have some idea of the stock market because it's talked about on the radio station every day and has been for a very long time because of how well that stock market has performed over such a considerable period of time now, the last 15 years or so. So again, I think the investment universe is probably a little bit more in your face in the US, and therefore probably people engage with what I would call as traditional investments a little bit more in terms of stocks and shares, as an example. Because we have been quite sheltered in the UK, and the UK is a small island that's incredibly overpopulated, there has always been a housing shortage, and therefore housing has been a very stable asset class for those that have got involved in it, and has done very well over, again, a very long period of time. But this default position of, it worked well for my mum or dad, or I saw my friend do it, now I'm just going to go and buy loads of property, doesn't help people in the UK by any stretch of the imagination, because it is an asset class that is not liquid, it is immovable, and because of those factors, it comes with lots of tax associations. So, on death particularly, where we have very low estate personal allowances, and it's probably one of the government's biggest tools of collecting money in the future and going forwards. They keep continuing to change estate taxes in the UK, or inheritance taxes as they call it, but they've not moved the personal allowance for a very long time, and they don't intend to, and that's a stealth tax because everything's getting more expensive thanks to inflation. But if you don't move the personal allowances, then the government is clipping more money just by inflation creeping up and pushing prices up. So, property is a default for most people in the UK because they like it, they can see it, they can feel it, they can touch it, and mum and dad and brother, sister, or auntie, uncle, and grandparent did very well out of those things, and they can see that asset rising. But the UK is making it a very hard asset to justify from both a cost transaction perspective and a tax perspective. Whereas in the US, we don't necessarily see some of the same considerations due to personal allowances being a little bit differently and property being treated a little bit differently from a tax perspective. And also our US counterparties, our friends over in the US, are probably a little bit more in tune with other asset classes.
I think one of the things that's interesting about talking about investments, right? And you're talking about more, traditional investments where you can get a return. But the other investment that I think I'm starting to notice as a mid to late 40s guy with, friends who are in that same area or even in their early 50s, the one thing that seems to have been totally missed by this generation, and maybe the last, I'm not sure what you think, but certainly the one I'm in right now, is the idea of creating a will, like creating a trust, creating a plan. I've done it, and we did it recently, and everybody I talk to is like, it's a what? It's amazing how many people in midlife aren't paying attention to how difficult things can be if you let your estate go to probate, if you let all of these types of you talk about the difficulty that you're leaving for the people behind versus pay a lawyer a couple $1,000, make some decisions, get a binder, hand it out to some family members, and
Yeah.
and be at peace then with what might happen. But I just I almost wonder, just linking this back to a little bit of the chaos of this time. Is that just one thing that is just one too many things to worry about? Is that the excuse, or is it a lack of knowledge that you even need to do it at all?
You're absolutely right, Jesse. And again, I kind of describe my job today as a financial planner when I get to interact with clients and work with clients is everyone knows that they need to eat well and go to the gym or do some exercise at some sort of frequency that is deemed frequent. Yeah. And that's all in aid of staying healthy and keeping your health on the good side rather than the bad side. But some people choose to engage with a personal trainer, right? And they don't engage with the personal trainer because they don't necessarily know that they need to eat right, or they don't know they need to go to the gym or do some exercise. They engage with the personal trainer mainly for two reasons. One, they don't know exactly what they probably should be doing exercise-wise. I think that's sometimes a bit of a poor excuse because a walk or a jog would do it. But the other one is more the accountability. If you've got a personal trainer that you're paying money to make you sweat it out on a Saturday afternoon, a Monday morning, a Friday afternoon, whatever it may be, they're making you do those things, and then they give you a plan and they go, right, go home this week and eat these things. And then next week I'll see you again. And between now and then, I want to make sure that you go for a walk, go for a run, go and lift this weight in this way, and make sure that you eat your 5 a day, and good things will happen, right? And if you pay a personal trainer over a period of time, give it long enough, you'll see an improvement. I think we're the same for financial planning or money or whatever you want to call it to that degree. A lot of the time as a financial planner, most people come to me and they're like, are your investments better than the bank? It's like, that's not what I do. I do that and so much more. People don't understand what financial planning is to a degree. We hold people accountable to the things that they haven't got done. I'll give you a real life example. I sat down with a lawyer this week, okay, from a very high profile legal company. Lovely person, great at his job, very senior. And my first question was, have you got a will in place? And you know what his answer was, right? It was no. He's a 45-year-old, 2 kids, wife, works in the legal world and hasn't got a will in place. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't need to once you spell it out, people are like, you're right. Do you know what I mean? And it's just having somebody to keep you accountable. I think a lot of people don't know what a will is. I think there is that education piece. And again, this is why we have a job. This is why legal teams have a job. But a will isn't a difficult thing to draw up. For most people, just put it on a piece of paper, get a notary to sign it and put it in a safe, right? You can start off with it being relatively simple, because you don't want to get caught in probate. I've had the own personal experience of that and how that's impacted family members. But people also don't understand the complexities of probate. The UK government will freeze somebody's assets until the estate tax is paid or the inheritance tax is paid. And it has to be paid from somebody else's money a lot of the time. If you're passing on property, we talked about property a second in the UK, if you're let's link it back to the menopause conversation today. If you're a middle-aged woman who has gone through menopause, sadly had a divorce, inherited property and think it's a good idea to continue investing in property because that seems to have how your wealth has been built up until this point, and you don't have a will in place and the only assets that you have no cash upon death, and probate comes knocking, your kids are either going to have to start selling properties, not ideal, or putting their hand in their own pockets to pay that estate duty. In the US, as an example, without even with a will, right? And a will is the first point of call, but in the US, trusts are quite useful mechanisms. They don't have the same complexities potentially as we do in the UK because they don't necessarily have the same tax implications at such a lower level. But probate in the US can cost anywhere between 2 and 10% of the estate, depending on how complex the estate is and how many legal teams you need to engage, right? So again, you don't want to get tied up in a system that, again, people don't understand. Now, okay, you're not here to experience it, But now you've left it to your kids. It's like, your kids don't want to deal with probate. They've got the emotional heartache of you not being here anymore. Don't make it any more difficult for them.
Correct. And on that, Tom, and I really appreciate you touching on that. And it's not an easy subject to talk about, but I think there's one step further than a will as well. And if we take into account a lot of the people watching this are going to be 35 to 50 type thing. A lot of them have got parents who could be or would be 20 years older than them, or maybe 25 years older than them. And some of those parents are maybe struggling with dementia, Alzheimer's. In addition to that, women with menopause are at more risk of Alzheimer's than what men are. So, 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are female. We have to start planning for this as well, because it's not only your will, is it? There's another document that you have to do on top of that, which is really important.
You've got your power of attorney documents, or even, and again, those types of documents can cover anything from financials to health, to all sorts, right? I've just done it with my own mother as an example, so she's got those documents in place. Should anything happen to her from a health perspective, she has very clear direction on what she wants to happen to her finances, who she's appointed to handle those finances. But I think on the age thing, Lawrence, and this is really important, right? Women typically live longer than men. Yeah, typically. But if you're touching on the point, and I didn't know that, right? So good piece of education for me. If women are more susceptible to Alzheimer's, as an example, but they still live longer than men on the whole, then it means they're living with Alzheimer's, right? And they're living longer than men. So men aren't here. So again, who is dealing with that situation? And if the right documentation, it's okay whilst the man is here and alive and still gets it and is comprehensive. When he's not, like, what happens next? It's just those conversations, and it's really important. And let's not be shy about this. Anything can happen at any time. It doesn't take very much to change somebody's life, good or bad.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's this awareness, right? Because there's Lawrence and I talk about this, right? And a lot of what you're talking about from an expert standpoint around financial planning isn't the level of knowledge that the average person needs to have. They just need to be aware. And the same thing with menopause, and a lot of the things that, Lawrence and I might go in more in depth of a number of different things that women are impacted by with menopause. But for the average man, they actually don't need to know that much to just understand and be aware that they're going through this and what that can mean and how it can impact them personally, how it can impact them, physically, mentally, with everything else going on in their lives. And I guess I would like to just bring the conversation back to the point of, we are just trying to help husbands and wives, couples, people be aware, right? We're not trying to create experts. Just understand that what's happening with menopause is more than a hot flash. It's more than a mood swing. It's more, it's more than insomnia. It's all of these other things too. It's what's going on with your finances. It's what's going on with your children. It's what's going on if you pass on. It's so much. And it all seems to be compressed by some just, mean trick twist of fate, all within some kind of, 5 to 10 year period, where it's like this zone of chaos, right? Where Dr. Mary Claire Haver is a leading expert, here in the US, and she calls it the zone of chaos. It's this period of time that you just have to, everything's great before it, and everything can actually be pretty good after it. But in the middle of it, you really need to be aware of these things. And I think so many people just wander through this phase of their life having no idea what's going on with their finances, what's going on with menopause, and how these things relate. And that's why I think this conversation is so interesting, right? Because and for me, what I've learned in this conversation is, as much as I'm learning about menopause and as much as I've already started to get this sense of it seems to just continue to stack, and there's always one other element of menopause that seems to build upon the other 70 elements that I've, and there's always this sense of like, when will it end? what's next that women have to deal with on top of everything else, and understanding that financial planning and all of these impacts and the impacts of her wealth, and how taking time off of work can impact her down the road. It's one, for me today, it's just been one more thing that is real and is important. And, we can't run from these things. Like I think you stated earlier, Tom, like there's no, these things are coming, right? There's death, taxes. And for women, there's menopause. That's also a guarantee. You're going through it. So that phrase needs to be updated. It's death, taxes, and menopause are the guarantees in life. But I think it's really been great to hear your perspective and education around this. Conversation needs to be happening too, with couples, with individuals, and the fact that Skybound is having, it has this awareness and is having these types of conversations with people as it pertains to their financial planning. I think is amazing.
Cheers, Jesse. And again, I think sorry, I was just going to say there, just keep flying the flag for education, and that's clearly what you gents are doing, right? So if we can get more people having these types of conversations, then more people will get pointed in more of the right directions.
Absolutely. Tom, I want to thank you, and in closing say, Jesse and I are really focused on doing some education. We're going to be doing education direct to women, direct to men, direct to corporate leaders, and we'd love to bring you in on that at a later stage when the time's ready, get you to come in and do more education from a financial point of view. Just wanted to say thank you very much, Tom. It's been really interesting. Jesse, thank you as well. And I just agree with you fully that, it's a subject that we can't ignore. We can't stick our head in the sand and just ignore it. And if anyone wants to reach out, Tom, you happy for people to reach out to you via LinkedIn?
Well, yeah, any means possible. More than welcome to go to the local Skyline website. We have, like I said, UK, US, and anywhere else in the world that you might be today listening in. So, yeah, feel free to reach over to there or touch base with me personally via LinkedIn.
Tom, thank you. Jesse, thank you. Have a good what's left of the Sunday evening, gentlemen.
Likewise.
Thanks, guys.